Hi, everybody. Welcome. As you're all coming in, we're glad that you put aside an hour to be with us this evening. So, as I said, I'm Alyssa DeFilippo. I'm the program manager for Connections California, which is Parents Helping Parents, one of our newest programs. We are an online, statewide resource and information hub for transition to adulthood issues and adult services. I'll put links into the chat for the website pages and for the spring calendar. We're almost through the spring calendar, but tonight you are at the first of a 5-series event. This one is how to ensure my loved one is taken care of after I'm gone. This is an overview of the specific topics that we will be delving into later as we go through the weeks in April. I believe there's something on the 10th, the 16th, the 24th, and the 30th. I will put the calendar, our Connections California calendar, a link to that in the chat as well. So if you haven't signed up for them yet, you can do so. So I'd like to introduce our presenters this evening. Ken Prodger is a financial advisor who specializes in helping families plan for the future, including special needs trusts, life care planning, letters of intent, and how to obtain and preserve government benefits. Ken understands that parents of children with special needs often feel overwhelmed with therapy, IEPs, and countless other issues, leaving little time or energy to address financial concerns. And yes, Ken has a son with special needs and is a past board chair of Parents Helping Parents. So thank you, Ken, for your service. Scott Gill, who joins Ken this evening, is a seasoned financial advisor with a passion for building long-lasting relationships with his clients. He specializes in providing financial planning services to families with special needs, helping them to achieve their financial goals. He's a member of the Financial Services Institute, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to his clients. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Scott and Ken. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Alyssa, for the introduction. Ken, let me share our screen for us here. All right, how's that looking for
you? Excuse me. So let's jump into this. So as previously mentioned, this is going to be more of an overview of many different topics. So if you feel that we're not going that deep into some of these, that's on purpose, because we're going to break a lot of the topics into a more specific presentation later on in the month, whatever. But the big thing is, how to ensure my loved one is taken care of after I'm gone. We certainly know that that's always going to happen. Parents are always going to pass away. And we need to say, okay, what are we going to do to make sure that when we pass away, that our adult child, is taken care of? If you don't have a plan, the state of California has a plan for you, and that's not necessarily in the best interest of your child. The first slide kind of shows a little labyrinth game with the, a 2-tilt axis where you have the marble, and you know where you start, you know where you got to finish up. And for most people, it's navigating that maze that's important. With special needs families, we have to make sure that we don't fall into those pitfalls. So that's really what we talk about. So it's not only what to do, but what not to do when you have a special needs loved one in your family. Okay, Scott? Okay, so this is the legal disclaimer or whatever. So one thing that Scott and I we are not attorneys. Now, we deal with special needs trusts and all these things, but we're not legal attorneys. So when and if there was a need to draft the legal documents, we would refer you to an attorney. We also are not CPAs. So although we do tax planning in terms of what the impacts potentially could be of some of the planning things, we do not prepare taxes as well. Okay, so a little bit about Scott and I. So first of all, Scott and I with Special Needs Planning Group, this is what we do. So it's not something that we just happen to do a little bit on the side. Over 80% of our clients are families that have special need loved ones. This is what we do. We deal with these issues both on a personal and professional way. We're both certified financial planners, meaning that we've taken the additional coursework and things to be able to be, quote, certified. There's a lot of people that call themselves financial planners, but few are actually certified. The next designation, Chartered Special Needs Consultant, is where after getting our CFP, we took additional coursework to be specifically trained for the issues that arise when you have a special need loved one. The rest of the staff were accredited investment fiduciary, again, been on the board of PHP for a number of years. And then the last one, the Academy of Special Needs Planners, which may be of some interest because we're talking with people throughout the state of California, that we have a network of attorneys and other people that work specifically with special needs families throughout the state of California. So we're very addressed of who those referral partners could be. So we have lots of clients throughout the whole state of California and a few outside of the state of California as well. Okay, so this is one of the more interesting slides. We really talk about the quality of life of the individual. That's the base, and all the different little pieces of the puzzle that fall on top of that. Whether you're dealing with out-of-pocket costs now, are you a regional center client? Do you have a special needs trust? What's the difference between SSI and SSDI, and when does that come into place? Do you have a life care plan? Do you have a letter of intent? All of these different things that come up with that whole umbrella of what the life care plan is. For many people, it's where's my child eventually going to live? So, oftentimes parents say, well, gee, my child will just live with me till I die. That's not necessarily the best plan for the child. So is there ways that we can get into supportive housing, some sort of housing situation for the child? So we take a look at all of those things, but you can see that none of these line up perfectly. There's a lot of different pieces, but we have to work with them to make sure that they work together for the best quality of life for the individual. Okay, Scott, you want to go through the 10 planning steps?
Sure. So, piggybacking off of what Ken just explained with the previous slide, right? The jigsaw puzzle doesn't necessarily fit very well, right? And so what are the things that we should be doing to make sure that our loved ones have the highest quality of life? And as Alyssa kindly put, today's overview is going to touch on some areas that I'm sure many folks have additional questions about. And in future presentations, right, that we will dive deeper into some of these topics. But if we go down and we look at these 10 bulleted items, where does it start? It starts first and foremost with identification of big issues, and then it transitions right there into, well, what do we actually want for revision, right? We need to start creating a roadmap, right? We want to start understanding where is our final destination and ultimately how do we get there? So Ken touched upon one of the big issues, and that tends to be housing, right? Where will my loved one live? If it's not with me, where could it possibly be? Could it be with siblings? Could it be with extended relatives? Could it be a group home? Or could it be a property that was purchased while you're still here that they would take ownership of later on down the road, right? One piece that typically comes up is who's going to help make some of the decisions, right? As in, well, who are going to be the conservators and who are going to be the trustees? Now, it's not uncommon for Ken and I to come across many legal documents where typically the parents might be the trustees. But one thing that does come up is what happens if the parents are no longer here? Who's going to step up, right? Who are those successor individuals that are going to take on that fiduciary responsibility to act upon the legal documents that may or may not have even been drafted? Financial resources is certainly something that comes up very often, as in what are going to be the ultimate tools, right? The resources that are going to be available to help make this quality of life take place, right? That could be SSI, that could be SSDI, right? That could be retirement accounts that have been saved in and accumulating wealth for a number of years. For many folks, it could be the value of their primary home, right? Well, our office is here in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area, right? We've been fortunate enough where home prices have appreciated quite rapidly, especially relative to many parts of the country. So how might a home fit into a bigger plan when it comes to being accessible to cover additional financial needs, right? In as much as things like insurance, life insurance, maybe it's a piece of your puzzle, maybe it's not. Part of it is understanding how could it fit in, okay? So when we start looking at the life care plan costs, part of what we try to do is help people understand, well, what is it going to take to be able to maintain this standard of living, right? As in, what is it going to cost today, but also what is it going to cost in the future, right? 5 years, 10 years, could be 30 years down the road, right? As I'm sure many of us experience, right? The price of a gallon of milk at the at the grocery store, or even, a gallon of gasoline at the pump, it's not the same as what it once was a year or even 10 years ago for that matter. So how do we start projecting what costs could be in the future in as much as what they are today? Right? Letter of intent is absolutely something that's very important. And, we like to think of this as no one knows your child better than you do, right? And what are the things that you want someone else to know about your relationship with your child to help make your loved one's experience in life that much better, right? Perfect example could be, my child loves to have a banana every day for breakfast. But more importantly, they like to be the one to peel the banana. They don't like it peeled for them. Others may have special celebrations that they know that they have every single year on your birthday, right? These are the things that we want to acknowledge. These are the things that we want to write down and that we want to share with others, right? So the preparation of the will and the other legal documents. As Ken mentioned, we're not attorneys, but we know attorneys that practice specifically in this field, right? And there's a place for their expertise as it comes to drafting some of the appropriate documents, right? To make sure that the proper vehicle is in place if and when they need to be funded, or if and when certain boundaries or certain guidelines need to be executed upon in the future, right? So the special needs trust and the ABLE account are certainly tools that could come about. And at the end of the day, much of what these do is they're tools that are able to receive assets to help protect and maintain government benefits. Right now, rules change with these, and what we want to do is we want to stay abreast of how the rules are changing. Right, the last thing that we want to have happen is to have someone become disqualified for government benefits inadvertently. Right, so part of it is understanding how would the proper use of this tool be take place, but more importantly, like how do we make sure that in the future, if anything does adjust with one's life or with legal issues that are outside of our control, to make sure that that tool is still most appropriate. Right? Family meetings are very, very important. We want to let others know what it is that we're trying to do, right? We want to let mom and dad know that maybe they plan to want to leave an inheritance, right? What's the best assets to leave for the inheritance, right? Maybe we think that our typical child will be the primary caregiver for our loved one with special needs. Well, have we relayed that message and talked about some of the expectations of perhaps the role that they might be taking on as a trustee or a trust protector? Right. So we just want to have open lines of communication and make sure that the plans that we're working so hard to craft and create are being articulated to others that are going to be in the life of the loved one that we have. And then again, as we talked about, plans are meant to be fluid, right? And for fluid plans, that means they can change from time to time. Much of what we try to do is not to set a plan in stone and have it be concrete, but it's to make sure that if adjustments are to be made, we're able to do them. Okay? So as we take the next step, this might be leading us to, well, what do we do to get started? And so, part of what we've touched on already is we want to take a look at what the future is going to hold, right? We've already touched upon the idea of the living arrangement, right? Where is my loved one going to be, right? If it's not in the primary home where perhaps they could be living right now, maybe it is going to be a group home, right? How are we going to be able to pay the bills for that? Where are we going to get the funding for something like that? Could it be with a sibling or an extended relative? Education could play an important part, right? What could it be post high school? Could it be going into a post-secondary program where we're going to a junior college? Perhaps we're going to an additional institution that could be away from home as well, right? Which inevitably could lead to a form of employment, right? Are we working not necessarily maybe to have extra assets to pay the bills? Perhaps it's because we want the social interaction. We want the interaction with other individuals that are in the community, right? So that way our loved one may not be simply isolated. They'll have a network of other people, of other friends outside of perhaps their immediate family, right? The medical care tends to be a very, very big one, right? Here in California, right, we have Medi-Cal, right? There can be the dual coverage with Medi-Cal and Medicare, right? So having an understanding of what type of coverage could be available for our loved ones, not just today, but also in the future, is a very important piece. especially when we start understanding what types of treatments might my loved one be having today, but also what may need to continue in the future too. Okay, so the financial resources, as we touched on a little bit already, government benefits tend to be a very, very big one, right? SSI, supplemental security income, sometimes can be misconstrued with SSDI, which is the Social Security Disability Insurance. So understanding how am I eligible for one versus another, right? What are the pros and cons of each one, but also what might that piece of the puzzle help fulfill in terms of some of the financial needs to maintain the highest quality of life. So the family assistance and the inheritance piece. I'll touch on the inheritance piece for a moment here, because it's not uncommon for us to find that some folks have, again, amassed a lot of money in retirement accounts that may be pre-tax 401ks, traditional IRAs, or rollover IRAs. Well, one of the things that we need to realize is when those monies are left to a loved one, right, our beneficiary must pay income taxes on those monies as well. Okay. And so depending upon how those monies are left, whether to our child with special needs or whether to the special needs trust, there are tax consequences. Okay. And special needs trusts, tax rates are very, very condensed, right? So we could be putting our loved one in a position where we could be paying higher tax rates than we may otherwise want them to by leaving the wrong type of asset. Tax-free assets that receive steps up in basis, like property, stocks and bond accounts, and brokerage accounts, might be a more favorable tool depending upon how we're leaving it. Okay. Lastly, insurance could be a piece of the puzzle as well, right? For one of the most flexible pieces of the life insurance piece of the puzzle is the death benefit is tax-free. Again, that could be an asset that flows into something like a special needs trust, right? Not having substantial tax liability upon entering into the trust, and then giving an opportunity for the trustees and the individuals overseeing those resources to be very efficient and tax sensitive as it comes to using the money to help pay for the ongoing support of our loved ones. Okay. Ken, I think I'll pass it back to you for the second part.
Okay, so the second part of how to get started is many times people will say, well, gee, do we need limited conservatorship? So some of those things to address are, is your child a regional center client? And what does that mean when the child turns 18? There's some legal ramifications for the child being a client of the regional center, and you may want to, have that legal responsibility continue once they're an adult. Just realize, and this is one of the topics that we will go into, that although we as parents look at that we're doing this to help the child, the court looks at it that you're taking rights away from an individual. So it's not necessarily an easy hurdle to cross. One tip to do, though, is if you've got other, let's say, adult neurotypical children that are over 18, you may put them on the conservatorship now. So God forbid, if both of you were to pass away, that the child doesn't have to go through another conservatorship hearing, that you've already got the successor conservator already approved by the court. Scott mentioned a little bit about the draft letter of intent, but it really communicates the desires and the concerns for future caregivers. As Scott said, nobody knows the child like you. There may be situations, especially, let's say, with autism and things, that certain behaviors and stuff that you want to avoid, or how to soothe an individual, and family traditions. What's your discipline style? What, do you have religious preferences? There's all sorts of things. Of course, the typical things of, medical history and things like that are all good information to have in that letter of intent. It's not a legally binding document, but it's a great tool for potential caregivers to know what's your desires and what's for the best interest of the child. In the legal documents, again, that we'll be breaking down in a separate presentation is, what is a special needs trust? There's several different types of them: first party, third party. What do we need to do with that? Second generation trustees, where we talk a lot that in the beginning, it will be the parents that will be the trustees, but what happens when the parents pass away? And for some people, it's who's that next generation. So when we talk a lot, when people, when they say, well, my brother will be the, successor trustee, the issue with the brother is that he's probably the same age as you are. So, again, trying to find that next generation of trustee. And a fairly recent addition to special needs trust is having trust protectors. Basically, the CEO of the trust, basically to say, okay, this is the things they're going to be in charge of the trust and have the authority to maybe amend the trust, to change trustees, to do those administrative things that maybe the trustee doesn't want to deal with. And just think of it, if you have a sibling yourself, a brother or sister, would you want your brother or sister be in charge of your financial situation? Sometimes having a sibling be the successor trustee can put a conflict between, siblings. So sometimes the sibling could be more of a trust protector, making the big decisions, and then having either a fiduciary, a trustee, or some other member of the family that can say no. Because there's going to be times as a trustee that you're going to have to say no to different expenses. A big one that's something that all people on this presentation should double check of who are the primary and contingent beneficiary designations on things that you already have in place. If you're working, you've probably got work benefits, maybe a group life insurance policy. Who are those primary beneficiary, and do you have contingent beneficiaries on that? Oftentimes, especially in the work setting, you sit there on the first day you're hired and they say, okay, write down, and you write down your spouse or whatever. And then there's no contingent beneficiary designation to do. You don't want your child to be a contingent beneficiary. And if you don't have a contingent beneficiary, and again, God forbid you and your spouse die, in the same car accident, then those assets are going to flow to your children, whether it's in their best interest or not. So make sure that you're aware of who those designations are. You may have individually owned policies. Maybe you have a supplemental term policy or something like that. Again, make sure who those beneficiary designations are. Retirement accounts, again, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, all of those that are tax advantaged. Again, be very careful of who those beneficiary designations are. You have a child that's 18 and they are a contingent beneficiary of a retirement account. Again, that could be detrimental to them. God forbid you pass away, and then all of a sudden they inherit a taxable retirement account, which is going to be considered an asset, which could affect their what we call needs-based government services. And then finally, brokerage accounts, the JTWRS, that's joint with rights of survivorship. That's a very common entity to own these type of accounts. But look at a TOD, which is a transfer on death designation. So that, again, if something were happen to both husband and wife or whatever, that you direct where those funds are going to go to. And you can direct that, let's say, to the special needs trust, so that you know where those funds are going to eventually come into play. Sometimes people think of if there's not a designation, then it could be subject to probate. And you want to be able to guide what is going to what account and what's going to what part of your trust, or possibly your revocable living trust, probably the special needs trust. And these brokerage accounts, remember, they transfer over with a step up in basis, meaning there's no tax impact for the vast majority of people. So that's a great funding mechanism for the special needs trust. So you get tax-free funds going into that account. We have a lot of families that they say, well, gee, I've asked the sibling to be the trustee, or I've asked my brother to be the successor trustee. And unfortunately, we've had people that have come in to set up an appointment and they go, gee, I didn't know I was the trustee of my, niece's special needs trust. And they have no idea what they're supposed to do. So it's always good, if you're asking somebody to be a trustee, to let them know what you're asking them. What are their duties? Communicating with the beneficiary. You have a fiduciary role in terms of asset management. you need to spend the trust money to meet the beneficiary's needs, but in a way that hopefully does not interfere with their needs-based government benefits. You have to keep records. So you can have where Social Security or the IRS comes in and says, okay, you're spending this money from the trust, where are the records that you're spending on? Unfortunately, we do find that there's sometimes abuse in special needs trusts. Special needs trusts can be funded with a lot of money. And sometimes that can be an issue for the trustees. We certainly hear about it occasionally on the news where somebody has fraudulently, absconded with a bunch of money from a trust. So you need to have good records. And you may have to prepare those records and present them to government agencies, again, such as SSI or Social Security or the IRS, to make sure that you're taking everything and doing things properly. So just be aware, and we have documents to say, okay, these are the things that a trustee needs to do and what their roles are and what their responsibilities are. And you may have a trustee that's very good in a personal relationship with your, let's say, adult child, but they're not necessarily the best financial person in the world. So you may have more than one trustee, and you may say, hey, this trustee is going to be responsible for the financial aspects of the special needs trust. And then another individual could be responsible for the actual needs and caretaking of the beneficiary, because sometimes they can be two different people. Scott, you want to do the dues?
Sure. So this brings us to what are the things that we can do, right? And so I think the first one that we have up top is, well, let's establish the third-party special needs trusts. And some of the things that we've been talking about today, right, extend obviously beyond the creation of the trust itself, but we still want to have the entity done. And we want to have it done by practitioners that focus exclusively on this field. So whether it is a separate trust or whether it is embedded into an existing revocable living trust, those are the two common paths that you can take. Your attorney is going to help determine which one could be a better choice given your circumstances, given your families. But the fact of the matter is, we want the entity eventually going to be available to help receive resources that will likely be passed down. Okay, so when going through that process, you will also be understanding and going through the decision making of who will be those successor trustees. And as Ken already mentioned before, we want to be looking at that next generation, right? We want to be looking at those individuals that are going to be younger in many cases than could be you, the parents, right? Someone that will have a little bit more runway in terms of continuing to be around to execute upon the wishes that you have within the legal document itself, right? Which brings us to that decision of, well, maybe the individuals that we want to nominate, maybe they don't want to take on the full responsibility as the trustee, right? But maybe they do still want to be engaged in a part of it and take on this trust protector role, as Ken already said, like the CEO, right? They'll help make a lot of the big decisions, as in, hey, is this person still doing their job? If not, perhaps we need to make an adjustment, right? Maybe that is changing a corporate trustee, right? It's not uncommon to see perhaps a credit union, right? Maybe a larger bank, maybe a brokerage firm take on some of the trust administration duties where they're doing the day-to-day. They're doing the tax preparation, right? They're handling disbursements from the accounts, okay? So the trust protector can come in. Is Bank of the West still doing their job? If not, perhaps we need to move it over to Fremont Bank instead, or perhaps we need to move it over to JP Morgan Chase. Okay? Telling the family members, as we already said, communication is so important. Ongoing communication, right? Setting the expectation for the roles that people are going to be playing, caring for the person in as much as caring for the financial side, right? Having conversations, right? Maybe with grandparents about what's their estate plan, right? How do they envision wanting to provide support to our loved one, right? Ultimately, what we're trying to do with the communication is to prevent inadvertent accidents that could potentially disqualify an individual from some of these need-based government benefits, Okay, so that next piece where we talk about any gifts to the beneficiary should go to the trust. I think one part that we could also include in there is potentially an ABLE account as well, right? As being another tool that can help preserve and protect assets, not be counted as you're trying to qualify for some of these needs-based government benefits. Now, there can be some restrictions for the ABLE account compared to the special needs trust, but we'll dive into that on a later topic and a later presentation as well. Working with the qualified advisors. Okay, so what are some of the things that we help speak with people about? Well, common one is how much goes into the trust, right? How much money do I actually need to put into this entity? And then how much can my loved one take out on an annual basis to continue leading the best quality of life that they can, right? And that's something that a practitioner can help you with, as in how do we incorporate different income streams? How do we factor in taxes, right? What are inflation rates going to look like? But also, helping as the parents, what are going to be the best resources to actually transition over potentially to that special needs trust too, right? At the end of the day, we're here to act as advocates for our special needs loved ones, and to make sure that we're doing what we can to take the best care of them, right, as these resources eventually transition over to them. Ken, did you want to include anything else? Oh, I think you're on mute, Ken.
Okay, so some of the things that we want to talk about when funding a special needs trust is what are we going to fund it with? There's things that qualify for a step up in basis that's very advantageous. It could be the sale of your primary residence, a rental property, a brokerage account, those type of things. If we're funding it on retirement accounts, then we have to take into account the significant tax impact of IRAs and 401ks, funding the special needs trust. We also take a look of when do you fund it. So most of the time, if it's only going to be funded at your death, then maybe the special needs trust can be embedded into your revocable living trust. But if there's a chance that it will be funded prior to you passing away, let's say with your parents, grandparents type of estate, then we have to have a separate special needs trust, because that if it's embedded into your revocable living trust, it only becomes eligible and is created upon your passing. So that's where we take a look at, okay, when are we going to fund it? What are we going to fund it with? And then how much do we have to fund it with? So, Scott and I we just completed a plan today that by far their biggest asset that's going to fund the special needs trust is going to be the sale of their primary home when they pass away. So we basically came up with, how do we come up with the liquid assets for the parents to survive and live and do well and retire, and then eventually when they pass away, is the equity in the home going to be enough to fund the special needs trust? And so again, in Silicon Valley especially, many people's their biggest asset is their primary home. So we take a look at that. It's not necessarily that we have to have a huge life insurance policy to fund the special needs trust. Your home can be the main funding mechanism for the special needs trust. And then finally, we're talking about funding the special needs trust. What about equal or equitable treatment of a typical child that you may have? Okay, so in typical financial planning, we talk about, well, okay, if you have 3 children, we're just going to do a third, a third, a third. Well, maybe one is special needs and the 2 are typical children. Maybe it's not going to be a third, a third, a third. Maybe it's going to be 50, 25, 25, that the person with special needs is going to need more financial support during their lifetime than the other typical children. Those are values that you have to determine of what we need. And then we come up with it and put some of the numbers to it, saying, okay, well, gee, if you want to support the child for this level of financial support, this is what it's going to cost. When you pass away, this amount of money has to be funded into the lump sum into the special needs trust. So it's important of determine, especially many parents, they say, okay, I've got the special needs trust. Aren't I done? No, that's just the beginning step. There's a lot more to it than just establishing the trust. Okay, so I think we're right on time here. We said we'd try to do about 35 to 40 minutes, so I think we're on time. So a couple different things on this. So we do offer free complimentary consultations, either in our office or via Zoom. So I think you will get a copy of all the slides for this presentation. There is some code that you can, the QR code to be able to get that. And then here's a complimentary financial consultation form. I believe that's in the chat. Scott, you want to?
It is. So I am going to repost this PDF and I'm going to put it in the chat function for all those folks that would want to have a conversation about something more specific and detailed for their circumstances, but that will be available for anyone that's interested. We do have our email address here, info@snpg.org. You can securely send that consultation form back there. Otherwise, this QR code here in the middle of our screen, that does take you directly to our website, where you can go to our electronic booking page as well, if that is a more convenient avenue in terms of scheduling a initial consultation to chat a little bit further.
Now, I want to thank our presenters for their overview presentations. Scott and Ken, thank you so much. We will see you back here again on the 10th, I think is the next one. Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate you coming in and helping us with the questions. It was nice to see you. And Beatriz, as always, thank you for your expert interpretation for our Spanish speakers. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. Have a good night. Take care.